The morning sun cast its first light over the Gaza Strip, but Yahya Sinwar was already awake. For decades, he had moved like a phantom through the alleys of Khan Younis, hiding in plain sight. Protected not only by concrete and steel, but by a carefully woven mythology. He was more than a man to many, he was a symbol. To his supporters, he represented resistance and defiance. To his enemies, he was the architect of terror. This is the story of how Israel, after years of surveillance, intelligence failures, and elusive near captures, finally cornered one of the most dangerous and secretive leaders Hamas has ever known. But to understand how the hunt reached its final chapter, we must first return to the beginning, to a prison cell, to a man shaped by decades of war, captivity, and ideology. Yahya Sinwar wasn't born a military commander. He was forged into one. Born in 1962 in the Khan Younis refugee camp in southern Gaza, Yahya Sinwar grew up in the heart of a conflict zone. His worldview was shaped not by textbooks or childhood innocence, but by curfews, military checkpoints, and funerals. The Israeli occupation was a daily reality, and the seeds of radicalization were sown early. In 1987, as the First Intifada erupted across the Palestinian territories, Sinwar helped co-found Hamas's internal security wing. His specialty wasn't bombs or bullets, it was rooting out collaborators and enforcing loyalty. His reputation for brutality was unmatched. His code name inside Israeli intelligence files, the Butcher of Khan Younis. Within 2 years, Sinwar was arrested and sentenced to 4 life terms for the killing of suspected Palestinian collaborators. He disappeared behind the thick walls of an Israeli prison. But instead of fading away, something else happened. He transformed. Inside prison, Sinwar learned Hebrew fluently. He studied his enemy's culture, psychology, and military doctrine. He also became a leader among Hamas prisoners, organizing them, educating them, and preparing for a return. And then, unexpectedly, the door opened. In 2011, after 22 years in prison, Yahya Sinwar was released in the Gilad Shalit prisoner swap, a controversial deal in which Israel freed over 1,000 Palestinian prisoners in exchange for 1 Israeli soldier. It was a political earthquake, and for Sinwar, it was a second birth. He stepped out of prison not as a foot soldier, but as a legend. His return to Gaza was orchestrated like the homecoming of a war hero. Cheering crowds, banners, and vows of vengeance greeted him. But Sinwar had something else in mind, something darker, something bigger. Over the next few years, Sinwar climbed the ranks within Hamas. In 2017, he was appointed as the leader of Hamas in Gaza, a move that alarmed Israeli intelligence. This wasn't just another militant. This was a man who knew Israel intimately, who had studied them, who had been shaped by them. Under his leadership, Hamas became more disciplined and more ruthless. He oversaw the militarization of the group's tunnel networks, coordinated attacks, and restructured Hamas's intelligence operations. The brief but deadly conflicts of 2018 and 2021 bore his fingerprints. For Israel, he wasn't just an adversary, he was the adversary. And then came October 7, 2023, a date that would change everything. In a surprise attack that stunned the world, Hamas fighters breached the border fence between Gaza and southern Israel, launching the deadliest assault in decades. Over 1,200 Israelis were killed in a single day. Civilians, children, entire families. It was chaos, it was horror, and it was meticulously planned. Israeli analysts quickly identified Yahya Sinwar as the mastermind behind the operation. The scale, timing, and precision of the attack matched his operational style. He had orchestrated not only a military strike, but a psychological one aimed at showing Israel's vulnerability. Within hours, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared, "We are at war." But this time, it was personal. This time, the objective wasn't just to degrade Hamas's infrastructure or pressure it into ceasefire negotiations. This time, the goal was elimination. Yahya Sinwar had made himself target number 1. What followed was one of the most extensive manhunts in modern intelligence history. Israeli special forces, Shin Bet, Mossad, and satellite surveillance units were all activated. Billions of dollars in military assets were mobilized. Drones hovered over Gaza 24/7. Electronic warfare units intercepted every possible signal. But Sinwar had gone underground literally. He disappeared into Hamas's complex network of tunnels beneath Gaza, dubbed the Gaza Metro by IDF officials. The labyrinth stretched for hundreds of kilometers, some as deep as 30 meters below ground, designed to move fighters, store weapons, and survive airstrikes. It was the ultimate hideout for a man who had spent his life learning how to vanish. Finding him would be like locating a ghost in a maze made of shadows. But Israel had a weapon. Sinwar didn't expect patience and memories. Inside the war rooms of Israeli intelligence, maps of tunnel networks were dissected frame by frame. Psychologists profiled Sinwar's behavior. Linguists analyzed every intercepted audio clip. Mossad operatives reached out to informants in the West Bank, Jordan, Egypt, even Lebanon. They weren't just tracking a man, they were dissecting a myth. At the heart of the hunt was a question: what does a man like Sinwar do when he believes he's invincible? And the answer was simple: he makes mistakes. The first crack came weeks after the initial invasion. Satellite imagery detected unusual patterns in a remote area near Khan Yunis cooler airspots near surface sand, inconsistent with the surrounding desert, anomalies that could suggest air vents. Then, a captured Hamas courier gave up a single phrase under interrogation: "The lion sleeps near the falcon's perch." It meant nothing to most, but to one Shin Bet analyst, it triggered a memory. A children's book, long banned in Israeli prisons, once circulated among Hamas detainees. In it, the lion represented a character hiding in plain sight beneath a large tree, the falcon's perch. The analyst drew a connection to an old mosque with a falcon-shaped minaret, half buried near the Khan Yunis cemetery. It was a long shot, but in manhunts like this, long shots are gold. A plan began to form. It wasn't just about firepower, it was about timing, precision, and psychology. Israeli commandos would have to move through miles of urban warfare terrain, identify one tunnel among hundreds, and neutralize one man without collapsing the surrounding infrastructure. It was an impossible mission. And yet, every soldier trained for it as if it was inevitable, because for Israel, justice wasn't optional, it was personal, it was historic, and it was close. The dust from October 7th had barely settled, and the world was still in shock. But deep inside Israeli intelligence circles, something had already begun to stir. Yahya Sinwar, once invisible to satellites and spies, had become the most hunted man in the Middle East. In a dimly lit underground command center near Tel Aviv, Mossad Shin Bet and Ayman met in urgent confidential briefings. The room pulsed with urgency. Maps of Gaza lined the walls. High-resolution satellite imagery flickered across giant monitors. Every inch of Gaza City, Khan Yunis and Raif was under scrutiny. At the center of it all, a single face dominated the board: Yahya Sinwar. "We don't want to degrade Hamas," one senior officer said flatly. "We want to remove its brain." It wasn't rhetoric. It was doctrine, and the doctrine had a name: Operation Swords of Iron. But buried within that broader campaign was a more secretive sub-operation known only to a handful of officials: Target Omega. Its objective was brutally simple: find Sinwar, eliminate him, no matter how long it took. The psychological war. Even as Israel's military launched sweeping strikes across Gaza, something else was happening behind the scenes. Psychological warfare. Hundreds of fake social media accounts flooded Palestinian networks, leaflets dropped from drones, radio signals hijacked, all of it carefully designed to destabilize Maryland, to plant a seed: Sinwar has abandoned you. In parallel, interrogations of captured Hamas fighters intensified. Israeli intelligence was not just searching for hideouts, but patterns: who transported messages, who handled money, who visited whom. Everyone with even the slightest tie to Sinwar was cataloged, analyzed, tracked. Facial recognition algorithms processed drone footage frame by frame. Heat signature databases identified human presence under rubble. AI-enhanced audio tools combed intercepted calls. The trail was invisible to the naked eye, but not to the machine. Tunnels and shadows. Yahya Sinwar, paranoid to the core, had disappeared underground. Literally. The sprawling tunnel system beneath Gaza, known as the Metro, was Sinwar's sanctuary, a vast labyrinth stretching for miles, equipped with ventilation systems, escape hatches, and supply points. But even in this maze, he was not untouchable. Israeli engineers, trained in subterranean warfare, began mapping the tunnels using ground radar, AI-assisted sonar, and old-school interrogation. Each strike, each collapsed building, wasn't random. It was part of a precise algorithmic prediction model. If Sinwar entered a tunnel in Raif, the system predicted where he'd reappear. If he communicated with a courier in Khan Yunis, that courier's family was watched. His phone pinged, his routine logged. The net was tightening. The human element. Technology alone wouldn't win this war, and never had. That's where one man entered the picture, known publicly only as Uriel. Uriel had been with Shin Bet for 17 years. Fluent in Arabic, disguised as a smuggler, he had lived among Hamas operatives in his past life. Now, he was reactivated with one mission: infiltrate the outer ring of Sinwar's support network. He posed as a black market supplier of medicine and fuel. His contacts were former prisoners, petty criminals, disillusioned fighters, and slowly, painfully, he began to gather whispers. Sinwar doesn't sleep in the same place twice. His brother is handling his communications. There's a tunnel route that leads to a mosque in central Khan Yunis. Uriel didn't move fast. Fast got people killed. He moved precisely, every contact verified, every lead tested. And then, one night, a breakthrough. The message: a captured courier, bleeding and dazed, gave up a critical piece of intel. "There's a woman," he said. "She's the only one Sinwar trusts to deliver personal messages to his family." Her name wasn't known, but the pattern of her movements was 3 times a week, same direction, near a bakery in Raif. Satellite imagery was rerouted, drones sent into hover. AI tracked her heat signature, gait, and even the way she folded her shawl. It was her, and she led them not to Sinwar yet, but to someone else. His brother, Mohammed Sinwar, The man who handled his security, his voice, his money. He became target too, but taking him out too early risked tipping the entire operation. So they waited. Pressure and provocation. Meanwhile, Israel tightened its siege. Rafah was surrounded. Civilian corridors were closed, opened, closed again. Food and water became weapons in a strategy of attrition. Leaflets fell again from the sky. Sinwar lives, you suffer. The pressure wasn't just external. Reports emerged of tension within Hamas ranks. Some mid-level commanders wanted to surrender. Others questioned Sinwar's silence. And then came the audio, a leaked recording of Yahya Sinwar allegedly telling his inner circle, "If Gaza must burn, let it burn, but I will not fall." Whether the recording was real or fabricated didn't matter. It spread. It caused panic. It isolated him further. Sinwar wasn't a hero anymore. He was becoming a ghost and a liability. The Mossad's game in Europe and the Gulf, Mossad launched parallel operations. They weren't looking for Sinwar directly, but for those who funded him. Qatari banks, Lebanese facilitators, crypto wallets. In Istanbul, every wire transfer to Gaza became a thread to follow. Some accounts were frozen, others drained silently. The idea wasn't just to starve Hamas but to push Sinwar into desperation, into movement, into making a mistake. And he did. Intercepted late one night, a call was traced from a deep-buried tunnel in Canyanis. It wasn't Sinwar's voice, but it was someone close. The voice said, "He's moving north. Next phase." What was next? Phase? Was it an attack? A transfer? Israeli intelligence didn't know, but they moved everything. Air assets shifted north. Human intel teams in Gaza received new orders. And then the impossible happened. A drone caught a brief visual, just a figure, hooded, surrounded by armed guards. But the gait, the posture, it matched old footage of Yahya Sinwar. They couldn't confirm, not yet, but they had never been this close. Closing the distance from here, the hunt accelerated. Every hour brought new data, new sightings, new fragments. Uriel was pulled from the field. He had done his part. Now it was time for others to finish it. Combat units of Sayeret Matkal, Israel's most elite special forces, were moved to standby, not to arrest, not to negotiate, to kill. And the plan was simple: wait until he surfaced again and strike with unrelenting force. But Sinwar, ever elusive, vanished once more. The figure in the drone footage, gone. The tunnel collapsed, and Israel was left with a question it hated. Was it really him, or was he playing them again? Narrator's voice closing of Block 2. He was the most wanted man on Earth. Every camera scanned for him. Every satellite watched for heat beneath the sand. Every whisper of his name caused movement in war rooms across 3 continents. And yet, Yahya Sinwar remained a ghost. But in war, ghosts bleed like anyone else. And Israel was getting closer, much closer. The scorching sun above Gaza gave no hint of the subterranean war unfolding below. Underneath the rubble and ruins of cities hammered by airstrikes, a vast network of underground tunnels sprawled like veins in the earth, dark, damp, and deadly. It was there, in this suffocating labyrinth, that Yahya Sinwar had chosen to hide. A place of shadows for a man who had become a ghost. The Shin Bet and IDF intelligence, with each passing week, refined their maps of the tunnel system. Through surveillance, drones, wiretaps, interrogations, and signal triangulation, the puzzle slowly began to form. It was maddening work. The tunnels changed, extended, collapsed, or were boobied. But one thing became increasingly clear. Sinwar was moving constantly, never staying in one spot longer than a few hours. He was being hunted, and he knew it. The Israeli military shifted its strategy. This wasn't just a manhunt. It was subterranean warfare. Special units trained in tunnel combat, like the elite Yahalem Engineering Corps and Shaytet 13, were tasked with the impossible. Find a man buried beneath Gaza, shielded by miles of reinforced concrete and countless loyal fighters. What made the task more daunting was Sinwar's mastery of deception. He rarely used electronic communication, often relying on human couriers, mostly teenagers or elderly men, slipping between checkpoints unnoticed. He even used Hamas's own civilian tunnels, many of which passed under schools, hospitals, and mosques. Every step closer to him risked international backlash and civilian casualties. The IDF had to be surgical and silent. In one instance, a major breakthrough came when a drone intercepted a signal from a inch encrypted radio, used only within the deepest segments of Hamas's tunnel network. The encryption was old, something Israel had already cracked years ago. It was like listening to a whisper through walls, but it was enough. They caught a code name. The doctor is in the garden. Analysts quickly realized the doctor was Sinwar, and the garden. It was a code word for a known tunnel complex beneath Canyanis. Under the cover of night, Israel launched Operation Black Garden. The plan was ruthless in its efficiency. Drop seismic sensors to detect movement, deploy micro-drones with thermal imaging into tunnel mouths, and strike surgically with robotic charges. But the tunnels were booby-trapped in one chilling moment. A Shaytet 13 unit lost contact after breaching a new section. Their bodies were never recovered. Sinwar had predicted the incursion, yet Israel didn't back off. they brought in something. New artificial intelligence designed to map the tunnels in real time using drone data, seismic feedback, and AI-modeled behavior predictions. The algorithm began tracing Sinwar's likely movements like tracking a predator's trail. It painted a terrifying picture. Sinwar wasn't just hiding, he was orchestrating counterattacks from the depths. He was moving elite fighters, weapons, and issuing commands from beneath the earth like a phantom general. Inside the Israeli war rooms, red dots blinked on massive digital maps, possible locations, each one laced with uncertainty. What if he was moving every 4 hours? What if there were decoys? What if he was already dead, and this was all theater? But they had a breakthrough. A defector, a Hamas engineer captured during a raid, broke after 6 days of interrogation. He gave a single piece of intel, a shaft hidden under a crumbling school in eastern Raif, leading to what he called the root, a command center, built 25 meters underground, lined with steel, air-filtered, and shielded against radar. It was there, he said. Sinwar had stayed the longest. On January 27th, after days of precision airstrikes and misinformation campaigns to mask their intent, a special unit descended into the shaft under the ruins of the school. Each soldier carried oxygen backups, body cams, and motion detection gear. The silence was unbearable. Every breath echoed. At the base of the shaft, they found a corridor with fresh footprints and discarded food wrappers. Someone had been there. Recently, they moved forward, inch by inch, until they reached a steel door. Behind it, heat signatures flared on their scopes. At least 5 individuals. The team breached in 5 seconds, but Sinwar wasn't there. Instead, they found his brother, Mohammed Sinwar, heavily wounded and in shock. Alongside him, encrypted, hard drives, maps, handwritten notes, everything was seized. Mohammed muttered a single sentence before slipping into unconsciousness. He's going to the cradle. For Israeli intelligence, that phrase ignited a storm. The cradle was an old code, one they hadn't heard in years. It referred to the original tunnel from which Hamas began its underground operations, a symbolic and strategic location buried beneath the oldest part of Gaza City. The assumption was immediate. Sinwar was returning to the beginning, making his last stand where it all started. The race was on. Over the next 72 hours, Israel deployed 24/7 drone surveillance over Gaza City, augmented with hyperspectral imaging to detect ground disturbances invisible to the naked eye. Dozens of tunnel mouths were flagged. Seismic sensors picked up unusual tremors in a 3-block radius. Subtle, rhythmic, like footsteps, deep underground. Then came a strange incident. An elderly woman was spotted by drone footage, wandering into a bombed-out building, only to vanish moments later. A microdrone was sent to investigate. Beneath the rubble, hidden by a camouflaged hatch, was a shaft descending into darkness. It was covered in steel and laced with explosives. They had found it. Operation Cradle Fall began that night. Israel deployed a hybrid assault, sonic blasts, to destabilize the tunnel's outer layers, cutting off all escape routes, followed by hypersure gas to incapacitate anyone inside. But they didn't detonate. They wanted him alive. What they found was haunting a narrow chamber, lit by flickering battery-powered lamps, with worn prayer rugs and a pile of notebooks. In the center, a cot, still warm. Blood on the sheets, a surgical kit, whoever had been there left in a hurry, and injured. Among the items retrieved was a small satellite phone, scorched but partially recoverable. The tech team worked around the clock, and within hours, pulled metadata showing one last call, not to Gaza, not to Egypt, but to Lebanon. A Hezbollah contact. Sinwar was reaching out beyond the borders. He was trying to vanish into the wind. Back in Tel Aviv, this changed everything. If Sinwar reached Lebanon, or even the Sinai, Israel's chances of eliminating him dropped dramatically. Mossad was brought deeper into the operation, initiating an international manhunt, and yet the Israeli public didn't know any of this. To the outside world, the war seemed static. News outlets reported the usual bombings, retaliations, ceasefire negotiations, but beneath that narrative, an elite chase was unfolding in the dark. A chase for a man who had built a state within a state, and who now slipped through the cracks of his own creation. The psychological toll on both sides grew. For IDF units entering those tunnels, there was the constant dread, booby traps, collapses, and the possibility that Sinwar was watching, always one step ahead. For Hamas, morale was splintering. Rumors swirled. Was Sinwar dead? Was he betraying? Then why was he silent? But the answer, as Israel would soon learn, was far more disturbing. Sinwar wasn't fleeing. He was luring them in, buying time, preparing something none of them had seen coming, and the final confrontation was closer than anyone imagined. Yahya Sinwar was bleeding, somewhere deep under Gaza. Within a collapsed section of tunnel, he was being carried on a stretcher by 2 of his most trusted guards. His right leg was wrapped in blood-soaked cloth, and his face, once stern and unshakable, was pale and sunken. The wound from the last Israeli incursion had been worse than he'd admitted, even to himself, but his mind remained sharp. He whispered instructions through clenched teeth. Tell them, move the cache to Block 9, we'll meet at the junction. His voice was weak, but deliberate. Around him, a small group of loyalists hurried through the narrow corridors. They were moving him toward what he called Al-Muqaddas, the sacred place, a fortified sanctuary deep beneath a destroyed mosque. Unreachable by air, invisible to drones, unknown even to many in Hamas itself. To Sinwar, it wasn't just a hiding place. It was where he would become a legend. Meanwhile, in Tel Aviv, the Mossad director stood silently at the head of a dimly lit operations room. On the screen in front of him were heat-mapped overlays of Gaza's underground, intercepted phone metadata, and decrypted fragments of Arabic phrases stitched together by linguists and AI. The pieces were converging. The recovered satellite phone had been the key. Though heavily damaged, it revealed a final call routed through multiple bounce points. But the signal had a unique spike, one that matched an encryption signature previously used by a tunnel node in central Gaza, near a ruined market square. It didn't guarantee Sinwar's location, but it was the first pattern that made sense. There was also the voice message, buried in static, but just audible enough. Prepare the gate. Final hour is near. Analysts cross-referenced old tunnel plans, public records, and IDF ground intelligence. Their conclusion: there was one section that hadn't been searched, not because it was forgotten, but because it had been considered destroyed in a previous airstrike. But what if that collapse had been staged? Israel made its move. The plan was silent, brutal, and precise. Not an airstrike, not artillery. It was a trap. They would let Sinwar think he had escaped. They would feed him fake intelligence leaked through known informant routes, suggesting that Israel believed he had fled toward Raif. Meanwhile, they would quietly encircle the suspected hideout, disabling escape routes one by one. Bait was set. They began to jam communications within a 3-kilometer radius. No signals in, none out. A dome of silence. Next, special forces moved underground, not directly into the tunnel, but above it. Using seismic mapping drones, they identified pressure zones. They would wait until Sinwar moved and then collapse. The tunnel behind him, it would be a net, a shrinking one. But there was a complication. Inside the sacred place, Sinwar's body was failing. He could barely sit upright. The infection in his leg had spread. One of his men, a former field medic, begged him to let them evacuate to Egypt through a smuggling route. But Sinwar refused. "This is where I end," he said. "I will not be dragged through the streets like Sodom." His men fell silent. Then, he added, "But I will take them with me." What came next shocked even his inner circle. Sinwar revealed a plan not to escape, but to detonate a massive underground bomb beneath Israeli forces once they entered the last chamber. He had stockpiled explosives for months. The sacred place was his tomb, and his trap. Back in Israel, ground teams received the go order. 3 entry points were identified. Yahalem engineers drilled through the upper crust of the suspected location, while Shatet 13 moved through the lower southern flank. Their sensors picked up heat, faint, but consistent. Then footsteps, 6 individuals, one barely moving. They knew he was there. Inside the chamber, Sinwar sat propped against a concrete pillar. A pistol rested at his side. He was shivering, barely conscious, but his eyes were locked on a red trigger device. One of his men stood beside him, nervously watching the walls. Sweat poured down his face. Outside, Israeli soldiers planted shape charges to breach the tunnel's sealed gate. They didn't know it, but just meters ahead of them, buried in the floor, was a blast rig powerful enough to collapse half the tunnel. One wrong step, and it was over. But Israel had one more card. Unbeknownst to Hamas, they had planted a micro-drone days before through an adjacent shaft. It had no weapons, just a camera, a signal transmitter, and one key feature, sound. As the soldiers paused, awaiting confirmation to breach, a voice filled the chamber. Sinwar's voice. It was a recording from the captured tunnel computer. The drone had looped the audio through the room. "I will not be dragged through the streets like Sodom, but I will take them with me." The guards froze. How did they have that panic? Doubt? Confusion? Then, over hidden speakers, came another voice, a woman, Sinwar's sister, who had been captured 2 weeks earlier. She said one word, in Arabic, "Yahya, enough." It broke something in the air. The man with the detonator dropped it. Seconds later, flashbangs lit the tunnel. Israeli forces surged in, swift, coordinated. 2 guards were shot instantly. The rest surrendered. Sinwar didn't move. He couldn't. He was alive. Barely. His eyes were open, but distant. As medics rushed in, one soldier turned to his commander and whispered, "Is that really him?" It was Yahya Sinwar, the elusive ghost of Gaza, was captured alive. The news didn't break for 24 hours. Israel kept it quiet. They needed confirmation. DNA, biometrics, facial scans, but there was no doubt. Back in Tel Aviv, the Mossad director watched the footage silently. He said nothing, just exhaled deeply. In Gaza, silence fell over Hamas strongholds. Confusion turned to disbelief. Disbelief into rage. Fighters began turning on each other. The myth had shattered. And yet there was one more twist on inside. Sinwar's chamber, tucked beneath a false floor, was a notebook, written in code. Intelligence teams would spend weeks decoding it, but one phrase stood out in Arabic, scribbled hastily on the final page. The second gate opens when the lion sleeps. What did it mean? A threat? A final command? Or the beginning of something worse? No one knew, but the world had changed, and the hunt was not over. The world didn't know what to make of it. The official announcement came at 6 a.m. Jerusalem time. The Israeli Prime Minister stepped before the press, flanked by military commanders and intelligence chiefs, and uttered the words that had seemed impossible for over a decade. Yahya Sinwar has been captured. No airstrike, no obliterated compound, no triumphant footage of a body. Just one blurred image released hours later, a man in custody, pale, handcuffed, partially masked, eyes half closed. The world erupted. News channels scrambled to verify the story. Leaders from Washington to Cairo issued statements, some cautious, some celebratory, but, in every capital, behind every closed door, the same question echoed: how? The details were withheld. Israel gave no operational timeline, no names of the soldiers involved, no exact location, only a vague reference to a multi-layered intelligence operation and a brief nod to the bravery of those who walk in. Silence. But for the Mossad, Shin Bet, and IDF Special Forces, it wasn't about publicity, it was about a ghost finally caged inside a secure facility in southern Israel. Sinwar was kept under constant observation, not just medically, though his body was failing, but psychologically. He hadn't spoken since his capture, not a word, not to guards, not to interrogators, not even to the doctors treating the infection spreading through his bloodstream. Some thought he was preparing to die. Others believed it was a tactic, that his silence was his message. But then came the journal, recovered from beneath his chamber. The notebook was more than a curiosity. It was a ciphered history, pages of encrypted directives, personal reflections, and poetic fragments written in archaic Arabic. The codes were complex, a hybrid of Quranic verse patterns and tribal dialects from southern Gaza. Israeli linguists, and AI models spent days decoding it. What they found changed everything. Among the mundane were chilling passages: plans for coordinated attacks on Israeli embassies abroad, communications with proxy groups in North Africa, and outlines of psychological warfare strategies. But it was the last 10 pages that caught everyone off guard. Sinwar had written them in the final days, likely while underground and wounded. They weren't plans, they were a confession. He detailed his transformation from prisoner to ideologue, from operative to myth. He spoke of the moment he realized death was inevitable, how he planned to become a symbol, not a martyr in battle, but a ghost who haunted his enemies even from silence. He had wanted to die in the tunnel, but fate, it seemed, had other plans. One phrase, underlined in ink, repeated multiple times: "They will think it ends with me." In Tel Aviv, the Mossad director stared at those words for a long time, because he understood something most didn't. This wasn't the end. The elimination, or rather, capture of Yahya Sinwar was a strategic victory. It shattered the myth, broke morale, and proved that Israel's reach extended even into the deepest shadows of Gaza. But it also fractured the structure of Hamas. Without Sinwar's iron grip, factions began to emerge, some loyal to the old order, others vying for control. Younger commanders, more radical, more impulsive, started issuing their own commands. Splinter cells refused directives from the Central Committee. Chaos simmered beneath the surface. Israel's intelligence services monitored it all, but what truly worried them was the silence. Not from Sinwar, but from those who once answered to him outside Gaza. In Beirut, Damascus, Istanbul, communication lines that had once pulsed with encrypted traffic went dark. No chatter, no taunts, no threats, just nothing. Then came the video. 72 hours after Sinwar's capture, a short clip was uploaded to an obscure forum, quickly mirrored across encrypted messaging apps. A masked man, face obscured, sitting before a flag that didn't match any known group. He spoke in Arabic, but not a dialect from Gaza or the West Bank. It was coastal, possibly Libyan. His message was simple: you took the body, not the fire. He then referenced the phrase found in Sinwar's notebook: the second gate opens when the lion sleeps. The implication was clear. There was more to come. Back in Israel, the mood was mixed. The public rejoiced. The man behind some of the most devastating attacks in recent history was finally in custody. Families who had lost loved ones held vigils. Candles were lit. Streets were filled with chants of never again. But in the shadows, wariness remained. In underground rooms, generals debated the possibility of coordinated retaliation. Airports raised their threat levels. Embassies went into lockdown. Mossad agents in Europe were put on alert, and still, Sinwar said nothing. Then unexpectedly he spoke. During a routine health check, the doctor asked him a question in passing. Something benign. Something about his leg. And Sinwar, eyes unfocused, replied, "You cannot kill what you do not understand." Those were his first words in 4 days. It broke the dam. From that moment, he began to speak cryptically, never directly answering questions, but weaving parables and quotes from classical Arabic literature into his replies. It became clear, Sinwar wasn't trying to escape interrogation. he was crafting a narrative, one designed not to inform, but to inspire, for those who would come after. Meanwhile, Israeli teams scrambled to act on the intelligence recovered in the notebook. Several plots were foiled. A weapons cache was found in Sinai. A Hamas financier in Ankara was quietly detained by local authorities. Under pressure from Western allies, a planned bombing in Nairobi was stopped hours before execution. The net was working, but the danger hadn't passed. The myth of Sinwar had crumbled, but in its place, something new was growing, not centralized, not organized, but viral. Clips of Sinwar speaking during old sermons circulated again, not as commands, but as doctrine. Young recruits in refugee camps painted his face on concrete walls. He wasn't just a leader anymore, he was a symbol of unfinished struggle. In Tel Aviv, as the Mossad director walked the halls of his agency's nerve center, he paused before a wall covered in operational photographs. At the top, Sinwar's face, no longer tagged as target, now marked asset in custody. But below it, blank spaces, empty placeables, unknown names. The war, it seemed, had only changed shape, not ended. As the screen flickered in the intelligence room, a final video surfaced. A child no older than 10, standing beside rubble in Khan Yunis. In the background, smoke. In his hands, a burnt fragment of a notebook page, held like a relic. He looked into the camera and whispered, "The lion sleeps, but he dreams." The screen cut to black. The world held its breath. And Israel, despite its victory, knew one thing. With certainty, the next ghost was already walking among the ruins.